Disclaimer: the contents of the videos on this channel are neither a representation of any sect, group, nor political party. It is put together mostly for educational purposes, using the internet as its primary source. The references used will not be put in the description box below. We mean no disrespect to those whose life were affected one way or another. These are our views on the matter at hand and can be considered an attempt to educate everyone on the complexities involved, with the hope that amongst other things, we'll learn to be more tolerant of one another. Thank you. Chapter 1. According to the Encyclopedias of War, there are 1,763 known and recorded conflicts in the world history, and 6.98% had religion as their primary cause. This isn't to say that religion in itself is bad. It isn't, as religion has over the centuries contributed to the formation of our current societies, especially in the development of our values and reshaping of our customs, most notably in Africa. So why the many religious war? It isn't a question that can simply be answered by a few words, because man's complexities can't be summarized. Every single person sees the world through their experiences. William Osler says, and I quote, "The value of experience is not in seeing much, but in seeing wisely," unquote. So how often do people see wisely? How many people learn the lessons they ought to learn from their trials and tribulations? It is common knowledge that misery loves company. P.G. Wodehouse on The Adventure of Sally says that a man's subconscious self is not the ideal companion. It lurks for the greater part of his life in some dark den of its own, hidden away, and emerges only to taunt and deride and increase the misery of a miserable hour. The point is, if not religion, there would have been some other reason. There is pain in the world, and pain demands to be felt. This takes us back to northern Nigeria in 1980. The Maitatsine Kano Riot of 1980 to 1985, and the death of thousands of people. Amidst it all was a man called Mohammed Marwa, the founder of an ideology so wrong in its ways that our motherland weeps for the darkness and for the blood spilled. This is the story of Maitatsine and its relevance to Nigerian's crime history. Welcome to a very Nigerian crime, Dark History series. The nation was famous for the export of granite, cotton, rubber, palm kernel oil, and cocoa. Kano State in particular was known for its granite pyramids. They were pyramid-like structures made from granite sacks, and they were a symbol of wealth and a source of tourist attraction in the state. The economy was functional, and based on the religious preference of Kano State, the act of sadaka, that is, charity, made it that everyone felt the goodness. The basic needs of the needy were met. In 1956, oil was first discovered in Oloibiri in Bayelsa State by Shell Darcy after 50 years of exploration, and this discovery would change everything. Crude oil came with mixed blessings. The global daily consumption of crude oil in 1960 alone was pegged at 21.4 million barrels. Nigeria had the oil, and there was a massive market for it. And you know what they say about sudden blessings. They are like double-edged swords. Crude oil quickly overtook agriculture as the country's major source of revenue. This had economic ramifications for the North, consequences that are not said enough. Taking groundnut, for example, farmers were able to earn, and the money was distributed among almost every level of the social strata. It was an infant system with a fragile dynamic that worked. Over the introduction of crude, money will be distributed among the few powerful ones, and human nature will determine the rest. This new system, coupled with other factors, led to the disruption in consistent economic growth and sustainability. It was the beginning of two extreme social statuses, the extremely rich and the extremely poor, with the in-betweens now becoming the minorities. The poor became poorer, and the needy felt it, and with poverty and hunger, anything can happen. Maitatsine, the one who damns, a nickname given to Mohammed Marwa by the locals. He was known as the man who cursed. Maitatsine wasn't of Nigerian origin. He was a native of Cameroun. He was born in the year 1927 in Marwa. He could be described as a wanderer. Prior to the 1950s, he moved from several places including Borno State, Cameroun, Jos, and Zaria, most likely in search for better opportunities. He arrived in Kano City as a migrant laborer, where he was sheltered and employed by a Malam whom he worked for as a houseboy in addition to his laboring activities. Maitatsine's ideologies didn't start out as earlier described. There was some kind of metamorphosis over the years. In northern Nigeria, colonial times were different than every other region in the country. They practiced a centralized system which made it easy for the colonial masters to take charge. All they needed to do was to get the heads and the leaders to submit, and the rest would follow. And they called this the indirect rule. The new leaders didn't think much of the natives, and they regarded their institutions, townships, estates and the likes as strangers' quarters and slums. And worse treatment were given to the migrating laborers. They were regarded as burden and disruptions that needed to be properly managed. So they began to implement policies that would isolate and deal with them. And a voice of discontent that was loud enough was shut by any means necessary. The colonial masters felt it was best for them to live in one place and under controlled conditions. These were times of dictatorship, and the feudal authorities had absolute power. They could detain, annihilate, deport, and seize the properties of any persons that tried to challenge them. Indirect rule meant that the colonial masters had sole controls of the institutions, such as the treasuries, the courts, and the law enforcement, and they were modified to be repressive in nature, signs that are still apparent even till today. Maitatsine grew under conditions such as this, and he and the other migrants bore the brunt of it. He stayed in Kano State from 1950 to 1960. He started out as a young preacher who used to preach in the mosques. His message targeted the colonial masters as well as the ruling class. He spoke about the exploitation and oppression by authorities against urban migrants, but all his attempts came to an abrupt end in 1963 when he was deported. Sadly, he wasn't gone for good. In 1972, Maitatsine returned during the period of the oil boom and the military regime. This time, he wasn't struggling to survive, and it wasn't long before he bought a house in Yanawaki. This gave him some kind of popularity and leverage, and soon he had a group of preachers who joined him in spreading the message. By this time, the message had changed. It had to. In her independence, and the colonial masters no longer the authority in charge. So he changed the message to fit the situation at the time. He spoke out against military governors, commissioners, emirs, basically the upper class for hoarding wealth, suppressing the people, and dominating the resources of the country. His ideology seemed to have evolved. It was now an ideology that targeted the working class, making it a clear divide between the working class and the upper class. His ideology was now more organized and strategic. At this time, the North was going through economic crisis. Oil was the country's main source of revenue, and agriculture was abandoned, and the effect of this would haunt the North for decades to come. There were other factors at play, and they would all come together to become the perfect recipe for disaster. Maitatsine preached against the use of radio, watches, bicycles, and basically any kind of technology, and also the possession of more money than necessary. At this time, he had started growing a large following, and the majority were the proletarians. They became known as the Maitastsines. They basically fought against the new established order, and they blamed the mainstream religious leaders for not doing enough for their societies. But as his following grew, so did their confrontations with the police. By December of 1980, the Nigerian army became involved as the matter had grown beyond what the police could handle. The clashes between the army and the Maitastsines resulted in the death of over 4,000 people, including Maitatsine himself. But the movement didn't end, and the damage was already done. The evil birthed couldn't be unbirthed. The infamous Kano Riot of 1980 is a violence believed to be one of the worst, second only to the Nigerian Civil War in terms of death toll and destruction of property. But it was only the beginning of many wrongs. There is information about the death of his son Tijani. He was said to have been devastated upon laying his eyes upon his son's lifeless body. He was said to have cried out in agony, saying, "O people of Kano, what have I done to deserve this?" He claimed that the government was responsible for the death of his son. Many believe this to be the reason for the violence that will follow. But how can it be that simple? An idea is defined by Oxford Languages as the thought or suggestion as to a possible course of action. The world is built on ideas, and every human achievement thus far started out as an idea. Ideologies, which is a system of ideas and ideals that form the basis of economic or political theories. Ideologies change everything. They are the preliminary basis on which systems are made. The worst crime of Maitatsine is not his attempt at the corruption of religion, because Islam as a religion frowns upon unwanted murder and the likes, and Maitatsine himself can hardly be called a Muslim, as he referred to himself as a prophet, and is said to have not acknowledged Prophet Muhammad as the last prophet. This detail is vital because when taking the Islamic Shahada, which goes like this, and I quote, "I testify that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the last messenger of Allah." Unquote. There are also allegations that he dabbled in the use of charm and talismans, as well as human sacrifices. If this is true, then hardly can he be called a Muslim. What is unforgivable, however, is the birth of an ideology so poisonous and contagious, one that has outlived him even in death. Many believe that Boko Haram is an extension of this, and the reason is quite explanatory. Similar ideologies, but even more so, the economic situation in the north hasn't changed much, but the frustration has had time to fester, meaning the contributing factors and conditions that made Maitatsine and his ideologies thrive are still present today, but are much more prevalent than they were in the past. In the book Nietzsche and the Nazi, the author speaks about the ideologies and analyzes the reason the Nazi movement happened in the first place. He noted that the ideologies of the Nazi movement were not propounded by Hitler alone. He majorly played the role of actualizing an ideal that had been propagated by the brightest intellectuals in Germany at the time, as well as the preceding ones, and this was what grew into what we remember it to be. The intellectuals being referred to included individuals from various fields such as the sciences, arts, politics, etc. They believed that National Socialism, which is an ideology that preached equality between all members of a nation, was the only way to secure the future of Germany. However, achieving that equality was a different ballgame, and along came Hitler. The author also mentioned that the Nazi movement came into power under democracy. This detail is important, you see. This means the larger number of the population voted them into power based on the legwork done by the intellectuals, that is, the ideologies sold by them. It was an idea they believed in and fought for, voted for because they believed the ideas to be true, noble, and were passionate enough to defend it. And indeed, there were some aspects of their ideals that were noble, but the means used in achieving this turned them into monstrosities, and eventually Germany, a country that didn't need to join the World War, a country that had a favorable position at the end of the First World War, started a war that plunged the world into the Second World War, and also a war that was eventually bound to be lost. Why? What makes a man kill another man happily without guilt or restraint, and without any motivating factors such as greed and the likes? Ideologies are truly powerful. The reports available about the Maitatsine riot were as a result of the panels and investigative tribunals set up by the Nigerian government to review and analyze the remote causes. The Ania Golu White Paper of 1983, the Kano State PRP government and the El Badawi of 1983, the Borno State White Paper of Elawi 1984, Owesu 1984 and the White Paper of Owesu Okoye 1985. In all these reports, the Maitatsines were mostly reduced to confused, uneducated, radical, unemployed, etc., and ultimately summarized to disturbances and objectionable among other things. But is it so simple? The Maitatsines were said to not be given any legal representation, and most of the version of events were gotten from eyewitness reports, most of whom were officials of the state as well as religious leaders. This is not an issue of fairness, but one of deep, thorough understanding. Tell me, how do you fight an ideology you don't even understand in its entirety? A riot happened in 1980, and in 2009, following a series of events, a new group called Boko Haram sprang up. According to the United Nations, they have caused the death of approximately 350,000 people since their existence became known to society. They have ushered in a new genre of crimes in the north. Not much has changed since 1980, and 3 decades later, a new group rebranded emerges. If any changes, things got worse, because the root cause wasn't properly dealt with. The earlier mentioned factors are still a fraction of the causative factors. There are many other contributing factors that caused the growth of such a tumor and its current sustainability. This video is not aimed at playing the blame game. Every party involved is responsible in one way or another for the current situation in the north. We will be talking about this extensively. This is the first series, and we will carefully dissect and analyze the matter. This is not a forum to insult the government or the likes. A better Nigeria is everyone's responsibility. Share your thoughts and comment with us in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Remember, stay safe and stay blessed. For more contents like this, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell.